Right, so it is day 132 of my attempt to plant a tree every day here at my home outside Lusaka, Zambia, so let's get on with it. So today's tree is not the first thing going in the hole. First off, we're going to be putting a nice Dracaena fragrans, and we're going to be putting this quite nice and low, just to make sure we have a nice bit of shade right over our tree. Then we're going to be putting a couple of pieces of bamboo, and I'm not entirely sure which bamboo this is. A lot of the smaller garden bamboos are quite difficult to distinguish. However, this is a clumping bamboo, which is much more valuable than a running bamboo. Running bamboos tend to become very invasive. They tend to fill up your garden very, very quickly. Clumping bamboos, especially the dwarf clumping bamboos, such as this type, don't. This one gets to about 5 meters in the shade. It'll probably be less here because it's quite a lot more exposed. We do have a bit of shade coming in here from a guava tree and a couple of small yellow ipe, which is the Handranthus, but it won't be as shaded as it was where I propagated this from, so it will probably stay a little bit smaller. We're putting that quite deep in the hole, and we're putting the growing points facing out of the hole because you really don't want bamboo growing into where your plant is. With the clumping bamboos, they can be a bit unpredictable as to which direction they will go, but generally speaking, most of their growth will happen heading out from the growing points. So provided you make sure your cut is in and your growing points are out, you should be better than if you go the other way around. Then we're finally getting to today's tree. Today's tree is the first conifer we've actually planted this year, which is kind of strange because I have played up a lot of the time the value of diversity in planting and finding a very distinct phylogenetic groups to make sure you have very distinct plant chemistry. So basically a pest or disease doesn't transmit as readily from a tree to a very unrelated tree, and so if you can find something very distinct to put between two trees that are related, you reduce the chance of diseases getting from one to the other. So you'd think conifers would be an obvious choice, but unfortunately the main conifers that tend to be planted are often very resinous, which means they tend to increase the flammability of soil. And one of the reasons I like to plant trees is because most trees are less flammable than grass, and eucalyptus and a lot of the pines and a few of the other conifers are the other way around. And we also do have quite a few benguet pines already along the edge of the property. They were planted as a windbreak long before I was born. And while they are very useful trees in terms of the habitat they provide to a lot of birds, and so I don't want to remove them, I don't want to add to them because they will change the soil chemistry and it won't make it more hospitable for most plants, and it will make it more flammable. So I will not be planting any more pines, but today's tree is often called a Norfolk Pine. Now that's doubly confusing because first off, this is not from Norfolk, it's from Norfolk Island, which is a small island which is sort of attached beneath the sea to places like New Zealand and New Caledonia. It's a subtropical island somewhere in the sort of Indo-Pacific area. It is a very small island. It's only about 36 square kilometers, I think, and only about 10% of that still has native forest on it, and that native forest is dominated by this tree. More misleading than the Norfolk in its name is the pine in its name, because whereas pines originated, I think, in Central America and have spread throughout the Northern Hemisphere and into parts of the tropics by now, I believe, this is from a group that originated very much in the Southern Hemisphere in the Antarctic, and they have spread to places like South America and Australia and the continent that New Zealand was once a part of, which includes Norfolk Island and New Caledonia. Now this tree is very often planted as a sort of parkland tree in very open spaces, but in the very limited area of natural habitat they have left on the very small island they are naturally endemic to, they grow in rainforest. Now it is rainforest dominated by them, but that doesn't mean their seedlings start in shade. They do eventually come to form the canopy and the emergence of that rainforest, the subcanopy usually being formed by palms and tree ferns, because it is a very unique flora on that island, but it is not very diverse. So I wanted to plant this in a little bit of shade to start with, especially because we are entering quite a dry period and the area it comes from does get rain all year round. While this is still small, it will require some supplementary water throughout the dry season, but once they're mature, they're very, very drought hardy. The two trees that were in the background during my introduction are actually mature males, as far as I can tell, of this species, so we don't tend to get the cones, which are also the part that has an edible nut in it. So I'm hoping that this will turn out to be female, but that will be in a long time because this is a very slow growing tree, generally speaking. There are other species I would very much like to plant which have a much more sort of notoriously edible nut, but we will have to see if I can get my hands on those at all. So finally, to make sure that this is well sheltered and also given a little bit of fire protection, because we are in an area which is still dominated by grass, which does burn very well, we're going to be putting in 2 pieces of Aloidendron because there's a lot of water in the hole. I'm trying to tuck those into the sides of the hole very much. And then I'm going to be putting in a whole bunch of pieces of Kalanchoe pinnata, which is the sort of leaf of life cathedral bells, I think, Kalanchoe. Very prolific. very hardy calico. Generally, if I was to chuck a piece on the top of the grass here, any piece that's found its way through that grass before the next rains would root, and we'd get a whole little thicket of it coming up. So that should really help keep this sheltered, keep this protected. It's very shallow rooted, so it shouldn't interfere with the roots of this in any significant way. It'll be a good toxic barrier, good fire break, and a good little bit of sort of protection against the sun, more than the surrounding trees can be. Right, so that should be everything for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you haven't enjoyed it, thank you for watching anyway. I will be planting something else tomorrow, so you can tune in for that. I don't know what yet. I have a suspicion, but we will find out together.